the final week of the regular season. And next week on the show, when you're listening and I'm talking, it's going to be playoff time. So I think because of that, maybe we will pencil in right now, starting next week, Balls on Fire with Major League Baseball and your playoff picture preview extravaganza, regular season recap as well. So, as I've been doing here the last couple weeks and just going with my own personal passion, but it is the largest general interest out there for sports talk as well, we are going to be opening the show talking NFL. So, but not, here's where I'm going to switch it up, because the last 2 weeks I've been on fire about my Vikings. First week starting out with a terrible loss, second week starting out with a great victory. Now we're coming off week 3, and we had another great standard victory. Not everything was peachy keen and rainbows and sunshine and unicorns and whatnot. But you'll be getting my take on all that, like always. Every week I will have your complete Vikings up and down assessment, grades, analysis. Did I say that right? That's how it's typed up on the prompter here. Analysis? Analysis. Okay, excuse me. That sounds better. On everything Minnesota Vikings that happened last week, as well as what they need to do to win this coming week's game. However, I can't start with the same subject 3 weeks in a row, and it's got to be different somehow. Like I said, from 2 weeks ago to last week, it was different because it was negative to positive, even though it was the same subject matter. Have you, right? So I got to start something. I got to start somewhere else. What has me the most on fire in the NFL right now, thus starting our show off with the hit opening segment, Balls on Fire. There we go. Officially said it. Your count was 17-15 there. If you're playing the balls deep drinking game at home or in your dorm room, which we don't condone or encourage, by the way. What has got me the most fired up is just NFL football in general, primarily all the different ways that I and you most likely entertain ourselves on a week-to-week basis with the NFL via different gambling or free contest game avenues. So fantasy football would fall under this umbrella. If you're in a Survivor or Eliminator league, where, I know that's popular with a lot of workplace offices and stuff, where you pick one team every week and just that team can't lose. But once you've picked them, then you can't pick them again. So most of the time how that plays out is the last one to not have lost a game. Like by week 4 or week 5, it's over. Usually everybody's lost one in your office. Maybe it'll go a little further than that. But so the best way to do that, most common way as well, is you have 2 payouts for that. The primary one being the Survivor, the truest winner of the Eliminator Challenge, where you picked the most consecutive winners in a row to start more than anyone else. But then you have a season-long one where you have your overall who picked the most winners, or the least losers for the entire 17-week NFL season. So that would fall under that umbrella as well. If you by chance happen to bet money on the games, if you have a bookie or go to a casino or someplace where you can lay money down on the spread of NFL games. I do a make-believe version of that on ESPN.com where I have 2 entries, one where I pick just the straight-up winners and losers of every game every week, and then a second entry that includes the spread, the point spread for each game, and then I make my choice accordingly in regards to that. I don't do that with real money the way I do both traditional fantasy football leagues and one-day fantasy football leagues or 1 week fantasy football leagues such as DraftKings and FanDuel. But so all that stuff and all the stuff that goes into, playing those games and winning and losing and whatever, like that's all the stuff that's got me fired up. Sometimes it's on the negative. For example, my fantasy football teams had started out great. We're pretty much, it was winning 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 every week for the first 2 weeks. Now this last week I only won 1 out of 4. So a little down about that. But no big deal. Alas, I will persevere and survive and move on. Don't worry. But I had a chance, and I still might. Hopefully this Thursday comes around. But I thought I was going to win some money on DraftKings this week, was doing real good, and then just a few things blew up in the wrong, for the wrong people or whatever on that Monday night game where the Packers beat the Chiefs 38-28. So I just missed out on that as well. However, I'm sitting good on some of these ones that I still got active that are the Monday-Thursday game, because you can play all kinds of different games that include, different contests, I should say, that include different actual games, not like all the games that week. But so I will be, for the first time, giving you my hopefully weekly fantasy football booms and busts to avoid, as well as my fantasy values of the week. So that will be coming up very shortly. But the main thing I was pumped up positively about, because that's all negative. I didn't win any money on DraftKings. I lost most of my games in fantasy football. It was a down week for me in those regards, where it had been all positive first 2 weeks. However, on the yang side of things, if we first discussed the yin, on the yang side of things, I went 12 of 16 in my weekly pick'em of the games. I only got 4 freaking games wrong out of all 16 that were played last week in the NFL. So I was very, very proud of that, pumped up about that, hoping to make that a regular thing where I just had the one bad week in week 2 that was single digits, and from there on out it's going to be at least 10 every week, even though we will be having some buys here now starting as of this next week. This current week that we're on right now, we have our first buys. You're welcome for that tidbit. The teams that are on buys would be the New England Patriots and the Tennessee Titans. So for your fantasy football teams, you're definitely going to want a replacement for Gronk, Brady, and Edelman this week, possibly LeGarrette Blount as well if you're running him as a third running back or a flex option. He had a pretty good performance last week. And as far as the Tennessee Titans go, boy, unless you're doing 1 week, 1 day fantasy football, you got no business really playing any Titans on your team, with the exception of tight end Delaney Walker. He is actually an excellent tight end to have in on your fantasy football team, on your season team right now, as well as a good weekly threat. And he is not taken in every league by any means. So if you're hurting for tight end, or you think you might want to go a different direction for your fantasy football tight end, check the waiver wire and see if Delaney Walker is available. That would be my absolute first recommendation. Don't expect him to be available, but if he is, make sure to grab him. But getting a little sidetracked off of the pick'ems, I was talking fantasy football there, but getting back to the pick'ems, I also was plus 500 against the spread last week as well, which was a first time for me this season. I always find it harder to play the spread anyway than just picking the winners and losers, as well as this early in the season where there's such little and inconsistent information to base your picks off of. So I was thinking that this week we could start out the Balls on Fire segment with both a recap of what happened league-wide here in Week 3 of the NFL season, as well as preview the upcoming Week 4 games and get to the pick'ems, get you my picks right away so that you can get those lineups in and win your money, courtesy a la of, your hump day hero, Scotty Ball. And if you lose any money on any of my advice that I ever give on the show, full disclaimer, sorry, not my fault. You didn't have to listen to me. I can't always be right, even though I think I'm always right. I know that I can't always be right. Especially when it comes to sports prognosticating. I mean, are you kidding me? If I could, I'd be filthy stinking rich and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys every Wednesday night. Well, maybe I would, because I like it so much. So, to get things moving forward, let's just recap what happened in Week 3, get you caught up. We'll get to Week 4. We'll single out fantasy football after that, and then we'll close out with the Vikings before we move on to our other topics. All right, so last week, one of the few. No, wait a minute. That's the spread one. Never mind. I was looking at the wrong list here, for crying out loud. Get your stuff together, Scotty Ball. All right. So anyway, excuse me. All right. So to recap the winners and losers of last week, you had on the Thursday night game the New York Giants winning at home against the Washington Redskins, getting their first victory of the season. Giants could very easily have won the first two games and be 3-0 right now. But alas, they are 1-2. However, they're on the right track. No big injury news or anything like that from either team in that game that I recall. Moving on, the Atlanta Falcons at 2-0 beat the 2-0 Dallas Cowboys in Big D. So the Falcons are now 3-0. I picked that one right as well with the Giants one. Falcons win 39-28. Cowboys actually played fairly well for a lot of that game. Joseph Randle, the running back, got off, had 3 touchdowns. Tony Romo is out for 6 to 12 weeks, somewhere in there for the Cowboys. Des Bryant is also out 6 to 12 weeks for the Cowboys. So you've got Brandon Weeden as your starting quarterback. You've got really a bunch of mid-level to no-name wide receivers, and very on the downside of his career, Jason Witten at tight end. Running back of, underachievers and upcoming no-names with a great offensive line and a decent defense at times, but clearly not last week against Julio Jones and the Falcons. Julio Jones for the Falcons would be the story on that team. He is blowing up, having an offensive player of the year type of season thus far through 3 weeks. Boy, that's kind of a tongue twister. Also, the other story with the Falcons would be both their running backs, Dante Freeman and Tevin Coleman, have been phenomenal when either of them have gotten the majority of the carries this year. However, both of them are currently questionable with injury. Hopefully, at least one of them can emerge for that team, here in Week 4. Last week, we also had the undefeated Bengals taking on the winless Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. The Bengals ended up winning that one 28-24. That was one of the 4 games that I picked wrong. I thought the Ravens would get their first win at home. That was a great game if you watched it. Like I said, the only news there really is Bengals are 3-0 and Ravens are 0-3 for the first time ever. No, they were the last team of all 32 in the NFL. They were the only team this year to say that we've never been 0-3 ever in the history of our franchise. All of the 31 teams could already say that going into this year. The Ravens could not. Alas, that streak for the Ravens is no more. Like what I did there? Probably not. But anyway, so you've got your 0-3 Ravens now and your 3-0 Bengals. Also, in a game that I correctly picked, the Oakland Raiders won on the road at the Cleveland Browns / Josh McCown's. Or is Luke the one? No, Luke's the one down in New Orleans. It was a slightly apocalyptic, ominish type of sight here last week in the NFL as both McCown brothers. We had 2 McCowns. That's right, 2 McCowns starting for 2 different teams. in last week's NFL games, we had Luke McCown starting for the New Orleans Saints in